I love figs. And when fig season comes around, there's a season at the sort of the end of June, there's a first start, and then towards the end of August is when the big fig season comes. And when they're in season, I love to eat them. I love the Adriatics and the Cadotas and the brown turkeys and the black missions, and they're all amazing. And I, at one point, I think with some friends, got 20 pounds of figs from Knoll Farms in Brentwood up here in Northern California, and those were so ripe. What I learned from them is that when a fig is really ripe, there'll be just a teardrop of syrup coming out the very end of the fig. And these figs, which I bought at the grocery store, aren't really as good and aren't nearly as ripe, because when they're that syrupy ripe, they're so sugary sweet that you really don't even want to do anything to them other than tear them apart with your bare hands and eat them. When they're not quite as syrupy ripe, I like to roast them. I love the way they taste. I roast them with a little bit of port and serve it with some blue cheese and some walnuts. And I actually eat that for dessert, but you could also serve it roasted figs as part of a cheese course at the beginning of a meal or at the end of a meal. And it's just really a fun way to deal with figs, so I'm going to show you how to do it. Take your figs. I don't tend to take off the stem when I'm roasting them. That's totally up to you, but I do like to slice them in half. And I just put the halved figs into a little baking dish. These are brown turkeys that I'm working with today, and this is actually fairly ripe. It's starting to get a little gelatinous and gorgeous, and figs are actually sort of like an inverted flower. They're not an actual fruit, and so on the inside, all of these little sort of pistils that you see are part of a flower. And what I do is I have them up, fill up my little baking dish. I'm just using a tiny one to show you right now. And I'll sprinkle on a little bit of brown sugar. These are not the ripest figs, and so I think they need a little bit of help with a little bit of sugar. So I'm just sprinkling on just a tiny bit of brown sugar, and then I like to shake on some port. And I'm using fairly cheap port right now because I'm cooking with it and I'm putting it on gorgeous fruit. But you don't want to use something that you think is absolutely revolting, because the flavor will be on the figs no matter what you do, so you want to make sure it's drinkable at least. If you wanted to have a lot of port on, you could put a lot on and have it reduced down to a syrup with the sugar a little bit and then drizzle it on later. But you don't want to submerge them. You really just want to shake it on. So you get some of the flavor on there, and there's a little bit of moisture on the figs, but not so much that you're poaching them. And then I like to roast these in a 400-degree oven for 20 to 30 minutes until they just sort of soften and start to caramelize a little bit and shrink up a little bit. And I have some that I've already done that I'll show you now. They're right here. And as you can see, all the port cooked off here, but they've gotten very tender. They're cool to the touch. I've let them cool now. They've just sort of caramelized and shrunk a little around the edges, and they're just going to be all that more figgy and more delicious. And so when I plate it up, what I like to do is just use a pretty plate, and I can either slice off a couple wedges of blue cheese, which is often, well, slice is a relative term, it's really just going to crumble. You could also take a little bit of blue cheese and crumble it over the figs in the last few minutes of cooking, and that way there'll be some melty, delicious crumbled blue cheese on top of the figs. Not a bad thing at all. But I just put a little bit of the blue cheese on the plate, add a couple of lovely roasty figs. Oh, maybe throw them across the room, whatever works for you. And I garnish the plate with just some toasted walnuts. You could sprinkle it over however you want to do it. And I'm going to rinse my hand, it's covered in cheese. And if you like a little bit of extra sweetness, you could either scoop up a little bit of the reduced port from the bottom, or you could drizzle with just a little bit of honey. And I know you're saying honey and blue cheese and sweetness and blue cheese, but that sharpness and that sort of earthiness of blue cheese with the honey and with the figs and with the nuts, it's just this combination of amazing contrasting flavors in your mouth and textures as well. So good. You're gonna love it, and it's a great way to enjoy figs during the peak season.